I can go first or you can go first. It doesn't really matter.
Well, you may as well go first since you got your screen up.
What this blue means, generally done, and this 12, 13, and 15 are sort of the next steps for me. So I field tested the throttle and steering. I've installed a USB hub on the tractor to plug in some different components. Physically, I've installed the GPS. The antenna is at the moment sort of temporarily installed, and by that I mean I've plugged it in inside the garage, and then I run a long cable outside the garage so it gets a good GPS signal. And I need to test that it's publishing data. To do that, I had to get ROS installed on the tractor. The laptop that I had, Jeff a couple of weeks ago had suggested I install an SSD, which I did. And although I could have probably fought with it and copied over everything from the existing laptop, I just sort of saved all that data and moved it over and decided if I need it, I'll pull it over. And then I installed a new version on an SSD. Got some instructions out in Google Land. I've done this a number of times, but things get tweaked a little bit every time. Went with Ubuntu 20, which means noetic. Installing this Crony for network time protocol seemed to be an issue at one time. Still have to fix the GPG key. I'm using VS Code or Visual Studio Code, so I install that. Port speed, set that. PNC viewer to let me to remote in. Snap seemed to be messed up, so I had to do a little higgery jiggery to get Snap to work. Went ahead and installed Sublime to have another editor as well. And then I finally get down to installing ROS with those commands that are based on those settings. And then printing those environmental settings, you get that, then create the workspace, blah, 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 not to bore you. So anyway,
Can you post the link to chat for that?
yeah,
I don't know if everybody can access that Google Drive or not, but that's not a Google Drive, it's a Google document. I don't use any of that stuff, so I don't know how that works.
yes, I can, if I can get back to there it is. Not sure if that folder is shared or not. So if it's not, let me know. And then there was some conversation a couple of weeks ago about making image of it, and Clonezilla is what I use to make a clone of the disk. I also installed Cheese just in case I need anything that video wise that it might be able to help with, but that was that. After that, I had the GPS board installed, and this USB line goes over to the USB hub. These potentiometers are there because I want to physically be able to adjust the PI and D of the steering, at least for a little bit longer physically on the tractor. I'm not sure that I've got the steering as tight as I can, and I don't really have visual. When I get to a point where I can monitor some stuff with Plot Juggler, because I haven't figured out how to visualize data, and Plot Juggler will let me do that if I'm feeding stuff in via ROS. So I want to still continue to tweak the PIND of the steering instructions or steering algorithm. So that's where I'm at. I had a little trouble. I don't know if I have the documentation here or not handy on the udev rules. I was fighting with udev rules on that USB hub. I know I've got it. I thought I had it, but I don't know why it's coming up. So I know that the GPS, as an example, is, well, let's see if I make sure. It's been a week or so since I looked at this. Connect TTGO board. Oh, so I've got two things to start off with to get UDF rules. One is the TTGO board and one is the GPS. I know the TTGO board is coming across as TTY ACM0, and it's physically on this, I don't know what you call that, because it seems like at one point in time I was writing UDEV rules physically to point to that physical location. It also gives me a vendor product and serial number. And then on the GPS, it's coming across as USB 0. But then when I write what I thought would be, fairly generic, I don't know if these are exactly what I wrote, but directionally they're correct, where I just put the vendor ID, the product ID, and blah, blah, blah. And then it wasn't showing up in the ls command. So historically, I had written some rules. These are old notes when I was using the Ubiquity robot on a RPi, as you can sort of tell by that. I was actually going in. I'm sure that's small for you, so let me see if I can make that bigger. I was going in and putting in this physical address of the USB.
My stuff, I ended up going with those physical addresses. And as long as you always plug your USB hub into the same port on your laptop, and then those should remain constant. So you can just say, take the first USB port and always plug the GPS in there, and take the second one, always plug your, whatever you want. Just make sure you always plug them in the same place. And it's handy to get a piece of paper and write on your hub, say, this port is GPS, this port is TTY, GO, whatever it is. Just write them right on there. So when you go to plug them in later, you don't have to, if your plugin is not working, you don't have to pull up all these things and say, well, where should I have really plugged that in? It's just handy to have that labeled ahead of time.
Will that work if I don't have a ID vendor or ID product?
Yeah, you don't need any of that extra crap. You just say, kind of like those ones down there where it just said, yeah, that type of thing is probably all you need, is where that one says TTY IMU nano down there. Hub type.
I mean, this is just something I had copied from, Google searching.
Yeah.
And it was because I had two Teensy boards, or maybe no, it was because I had cheap Arduino boards and they didn't have a serial number. But so you're saying go for that kernels equals.
Yeah, I
Right.
think that's what I ended up doing because, rather than trying to figure it out every time you plug something new in, well, is it going to screw you up? So I just simply said this port will be called like where it says symlink there, whatever you want to call it. So, and all that other stuff ahead of that sometimes is just somebody's interpretation of, it was their guessing at how to make this stuff work. I do see on the left there where it says USB hub type equals, and it's got something written down there. I don't know what that does. So you may not need that. And the kernel equals TTY USB 0 through 9. I don't, you might need that. So one might the one that's coming up as USB 0, you might have to put that line. Then when it comes up as ACM 0, you might have to change that to say TTY ACM 0 through 9. But
Okay.
just play with it and see if it works or doesn't work.
Good
And
advice.
where
Thank you.
where it says kernels equals, then you got all those numbers in there. Do you remember just off the top of your head, you remember how you got those? And I was going to point out that when you plug a device in, just do a, what do you call it? Not D message. Yeah, do a D message, and it'll say, "Oh, you've got a new device." It lists a bunch of stuff. You can glean it out of there without having to go through all this other stuff trying to track it down.
Yeah, so I did a D message on USB 0, and then it fed me back that.
Yeah.
And then I did a D message on that to get, whatever data was popping up for that.
Yeah, probably down there where it says 8-1.3:1.0. That's probably, what you want to put in there to, that's the port address for that particular port, I think. Otherwise, you still might have to piece things together a little bit, but I think that's a direct port address. You said here's how you did it last time. You had something like 4 dash something. Well, this is actually based on your, I assume this is based on your one you're doing right now. So
Yes, this is based on the HP laptop, where the previous one was based on the RPi running Ubiquity.
yeah, okay. And if you look at it hard enough, you can tell with those numbers. I think 8 is the number of the USB port on the laptop, and then the 1.3 I think is saying on that port. So on your hub, and then that's going to be the base address of your hub, and then the colon 1.0 is going to be the actual connector on that USB hub. So if you look at it long enough, you can, or look at it hard enough, you can track down what all that stuff means. But I think that's the basic thing. You just need to know that that port is going to be called whatever you want to call it.
So I think I will simplify that udev rule that I used before as much as possible and see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Let's see. Then I also spent some time on this installing the NavSat driver, but I didn't get very far. But these are the older instructions that I had. So next step is to get the udev thing working and then update the. I got ROS installed. I get the udev working, install this driver, and see if it's putting out a ROS message. So that's where I'm at.
This is a different page than we were just looking at, which
This is
I tried your link and I can view it, and I don't know, what people have to have for permissions to get in here, but
this is. I try to break things down a little bit. So this is just getting the NavSat driver, the ROS NavSat driver to work. So these are old, need to be updated because it's based on RPi.
Yeah.
It'll probably hopefully be pretty close.
I was just thinking that since you're pulling these pages up and reading through them, that it would just be handy if somebody could click on it and go look at this stuff to see what's there.
So that's where I'm at. A little bit of progress, but still need to keep at it. How about you, with all your real estate issues? Any robot activity?
I'm continuing to order parts and continuing to take stuff apart and put it back together. So on the last meeting, I was holding up this thing. These are the pieces for that back end, and this, so it's got this axle through, and then a wheel slides on the end, and it's got a belt drive for it. And then 2 or 3 meetings ago, I was showed the picture of the green robot on the floor with this thing bolted to it. So it just bolted to a piece of plywood with all the stuff on there. So I decided if I want to make this thing narrower than what it is, because with this rod right here, I think it will give me the wheel goes right about here, and I think it gives me 15 inches center to center. And I thought, well, if I make it smaller, you know, just to blatantly make it smaller, I could take that down to the so the distance between the 2 wheels out here, instead of being 15 inches, I might take it down to 13 inches or 12 inches. So my options at that point, that brought up the next problems, because this is a piece of 1/2 inch rod from the hardware store, and I was trying to see if this would show up on the camera. So right here, I apparently talked somebody into putting it on their lathe and cutting this down. Here, let me do this. So I cut this down from 1/2 inch down to 12 millimeters, because the bearing is a 12 millimeter bearing that goes on there. And then I also noticed that I've got somehow I cut like a flat spot on the shaft. Is that going to show up? So I think I had probably somebody had a lathe that turned down the size and then cut a flat spot, because it's a really nice looking flat spot on there. So the problem is, if I want to replace this, I could just grab a new rod. Here's one that hasn't had anything done to it. And what I'd have to do, I'd have to cut about this much of it down and cut the diameter down, and then cut a flat spot. And I don't have a metal lathe, so I try to figure out ways. Could I do it with a drill and a file, or just a file, or whatever? And I thought, well, if I were to where's my props? Oh, it's right there. So I could use start off with threaded rod, and then figure out how much I want. So if I spin this and put a file on it, it's gonna trim it down quicker, because most of the metal's already gone, because of the threads there. So I might be able to do that. So I can just make a new rod the length I want and cut those down. But it still seems like it's gonna be a pain to do that, because I could use a file, or I could say set up my drill press next to a grinder, and then push the grinder up against it, and then take the handle and drill press and run the thing up and down to cut the thing. So that would be a whole nother what would you call it, exploration. And I'm not sure I want to do that right now. So the other option would be take this is the original shaft. If I don't mind destroying my original shaft, what I can do is I just cut a piece out of the middle here. So cut out whatever it takes to make it the length I want, and then take the 2 pieces and shove them back together and get a V block like this. This is what I made on a table saw when I was welding something once before. So if you consider like this, here's your 2, after I cut the shaft in half, then take the 2 pieces and slide them together like this, and then just weld one spot and turn it and weld it and turn it and weld it. So, 2, 3, or 4 different tack welds on there should solve that. So basically, I can just shorten the shaft up by doing that, and that should be fairly quick. So it'll still look just like this. It'll just be shorter in the middle and have some nasty looking weld stuff on there. Now, another thing I thought of was if I'd cut them off and then thread the end of it. So basically, it would look So the ends of it would look like this when I got done. So I'd have, you know, the two pieces and thread them appropriately, and then use one of these things, which they call these couplers. If you get small ones, everybody calls them standoffs, but you get the bigger ones. This is for 1/2 inch, and it's called a 1/2 inch coupler. So yeah, I think you use it when you're putting in HVAC. So you got threaded rod from the ceiling. You use this to hook them together. That's what they're for. But so that'd be another option. So without welding, I could if I could figure out how to thread these rods that I have, then I can screw them together. And this doesn't actually fit, but we'll pretend these are the right size. The bolts are 7/16 and the coupler is 1/2 inch. But basically, when I'm done, it would be like that. And that would also give me the option, if I wanted to, I could increase or decrease the length of the shaft by just how far they're screwed into there. So that might be another way to approach that. So once I get it like I wanted, I could put some Loctite and put it on there so it make it fairly permanent. So that's different ways, different fabrication techniques I've been looking at, trying to figure out how to get that to work. So that if I could do that, get that shortened up, then that will set the width of the back, so that, you know, I say, okay, here's the back. If I make it 12 inches wide or 13 inches wide, then the front end is going to have to be that width. So what do I have on the front that I've been playing with here? Well, I guess it's the same stuff I was, showing before, where I've got the plastic block, and it's got bearings pressed into here, and then a bolt through there. And when I measured the bearings, they turned out they're 8mm bearings. So I found out that if you live in the United States, don't use metric, because all the parts are real darn expensive and you can't find them anywhere. So you can't just go to your local surplus store and get one. And here, I should have these taken apart. Anyway, the one here, this is I think an official 8mm bolt. And so I thought, well, that's what I have to do. So I was at the surplus store digging through stuff, and I found some bolts that look like they're the right size. They look like this. And I thought, well, those look like they're right. So I ran around the store and found they had some giant calipers hanging up that you could buy for $24 or something. So it was a 24-inch caliper, just a mechanical, but basically like a sliding ruler is what it was. And I measured these, and I thought, well, it looks like it's 8mm. Then I went over to Home Depot last night to get some keys made, and I thought, well, let me look at their nuts. So I was trying to find 8mm nuts to screw on there. And I thought, well, I'm not sure this is right. So I got the little thing on the wall, it's got all the different nuts on it, so you can screw it in. And I was checking that, and it turns out it didn't seem to want to go in either of the 8mm size. So I tried it on the 5/16, and it turns out this is a 5/16 inch bolt. So I came home and pulled out my calculator and went on the internet and said, convert 8mm to a size, and then divide 5/16. It turns out there's only like 0.003 difference between those two types of bolts. So that right there turns out that instead of paying $3 a piece for a bolt like that, and then the lock nuts are like $2.50 for a lock nut, or I can just go into somewhere like, if I use the American sizes, I go in and buy a bag like this. These are the 4-inch long, and it says there's 6 of them in the bag for $4.50. And if I get the metric ones, they are like $3 a piece. So if I can just get away from using the metric completely, I'll be much better off on that. So I try to think if there's any more comments about the bolts. That's probably the only size that between American and metric that you can interchange it, because everything else is going to be some weird sizes or something. But so it looks like I can switch over to the American ones, so I can get the bolts. And I found these at the surplus store, thinking, well, I'm going to have to go back there and buy a bunch of these, because that's the only place I can seem to be able to find 8mm bolts. But it turns out they're not 8mm anyway, so I can just walk into Home Depot or Menards and buy a bag of bolts this length and 5/16, and for very little money I can get a bunch of those, and then I can just get nuts anywhere. So I think I'm happy I figured that out and didn't waste a lot of time and effort on that. So let's see, and then on the front end, well, I was showing this last time. I ordered some of these ball joints And it turns out they're sloppier. They're sloppier than I want them to be. And since the whole point right now, I'm trying to get my steering tighter than it was. And it turns out if you get these kind, that these are nice and tight, and it's got more length here to do adjustment. And I had 2 of these, so I just went on Amazon and ordered 4 more, so I'll have enough to do it with. So basically, I also showed, I think I showed last time that, here's the giant RC servo, and this is actually set up for my transmission. But if I do it for, I'll put a wider plate on here, and then have one right here going to whichever wheel that is, and then have another one like here going to the other wheel. So I'm going to do everything from the center. I'm not going to have it like I did before. And I'm not sure it makes a lot of difference, but for right now, that's what I'm going to try on that. What else do I have? What are my other props? Another thing I was trying to do, I was saying I could thread the ends of these rods. And so here's one, and I ended up buying this die to do it with. And I bought a tap and die set from Harbor Freight. I cannot get that to start on, say, cutting this at all. And then I thought, well, while I was there, I found this tap handle, or this die handle, cost me $10, and the die itself, I think, was like $3.50. So that surprised me that it was that cheap. So I brought it home and tried it, and I still couldn't get it to start on there. And somewhere on the package it said you should make sure you cut the end off nice and square, and it says you should bevel the end. So I was just sitting watching TV, so I grabbed a file and tried to cut, just a slight bevel on the end, and it looks like that might actually work. But I'd probably make it more of a taper, and then once I get that, then I think I can put this on, and because it wants to start now, but I think if I put a taper on there, it'd probably work better. So if I can't get that, so back to this one, if I cut this one off and thread the 2 pieces in the middle, and if I attempt to thread it, I can't, well, I can still just shove them together and weld it. So that's not going to be the end of the world, I don't think. So it's just going to be experimenting and learning how to get this stuff to work. So other than that, so that's all the mechanical stuff that I've been doing.
I like the cut in the middle, trim it off, put it on your jig and weld it solution.
And that might be the easiest, because I can use that. I could either use a hacksaw, or I could use my take my angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. That seems to be real handy, those angle grinders, because whether you put in a sanding disc or a cutoff disc, and they also have grinding discs that I never use those, but it seems that you could do just about anything with one of those angle grinders. And you go to Harbor Freight and buy one for $10 or something when they're on sale. So that works out great for. What's that?
It looks like you have a jig there that will hold it steady. So, I mean, I would give that a go. I also put a link to McMaster Car. I don't know if you've ever used them for supplies. I get stuff from them whenever Home Depot doesn't have it.
I normally don't go to those kind of places, but usually I just go to Amazon and find out what they have. If I can find Amazon and eBay, if I can't find it at a local store. But yeah, I realize there are lots of places around like that.
I looked up an M8 bolt. Is that what you were thinking to use originally?
Yes.
Yeah. So they sell them in packages of 10.
Do you recall approximately how much they charge you for a package of 10?
$13 per pack of 10.
So that's probably about twice the price that I have to pay if I was using the American type bolts.
$1 a bolt, or $1.25 a bolt.
Yeah. The other point is, it depends on what you're trying to do, because, like, say for instance on the wheels, see, I've got this is my wheel that goes on the back, and that's the one that has the 12mm hole in it. Well, that pretty much dictates what you have to do. So I had to cut the shaft down. I had to cut the shaft down to 12mm, and then it's got a thing in the middle. Well, anyway, so you got that, and it works really well. It's just that that dictates how you do it, because it's got to fit, that shaft has to fit through that 12 millimeter bearing. But then there's like the thing where I was trying to do here, where it's just a matter of putting a bolt through this bearing, because these bearings have 8 millimeter holes, and I decided I could use either an M8 or a 5/16 bolt. Well, there's really nothing other than the diameter at that point, so either one would work. And then if you already have something that's threaded, then you have to get the right stuff. Like for instance, on these kind of things, when you buy these, this is an M6 threads. The hole is an M6 and the threads are an M6. So that dictates, well, then out here, this threaded rod has to be M6 of the correct pitch and all that. So, but I can put this on there, which is metric, and then put the other stuff that's American. And as long as you're not trying to hook them together, because the threads don't match and the sizes don't match or whatever. But yeah, that's just something to consider on that. Oh, back to like McMaster Car. What do they do for shipping? So if you pay $13 for a box of bolts, then how do they charge shipping on that? Yeah, you seem to be muted.
I do think so it's a little bit longer. It takes, a week, and I do think you pay $4 or $5 for shipping. So
yeah, so all that stuff adds up, and you just have to figure out, do you want to go that way, or that if I can just run over to say Menards or Home Depot and get something, that works out great. Oh, back to my stories about the local hardware store that's closing. I was keeping track of extruded steel. So I look at like angle iron, and I bought one square tube there, a 1-inch square tube, and I was keeping track because they purposely marked their prices up a lot anyway, just because they're a local surplus store or a local hardware store, neighborhood hardware store. So I was comparing them against Menard. So I was trying to say, well, as their price reduction comes down, at what point can I get it cheaper at this place as opposed to going to Menards? And it's right now they got everything is half off, and it's about an equal price between the two. So I still don't think I want to stock up on something that's close enough I can just walk over and buy it. And if I go to Fleet Farm, which is I think they're even cheaper prices than what Menards has. So, but they're way on the outskirts of town. So I have to go on a safari to get out there. So it's just more things. I thought I had something else about that store. I guess the only real point is they're down to 50% off now on all their stuff. And I was over there looking for the M8 bolts and M8 hardware. And number one, those kind of places don't have a lot of metric stuff to start with. And if you can find it in the drawer, the drawers are empty. And then on top of that, they want $3 a piece for bolts. So, but even at $3 a piece, get a half price. Well, they're still $1.50. And so in this case, I'm glad I could switch over to American bolts, and they fit. Seem to fit really well. They fit well enough. I'll put it that way. Because I got a trade-off here between where I'm saying, well, I want it to be the steering to be tighter, but then again, it's just an experiment. So if I have to, I can just do something and just put it together, and hopefully that's going to be close enough. So that's all I have. That's all I have to say about the hardware store. And it just needs to now just sit down and start cutting and deciding what to do. I guess if I cut off this shaft, cut off my back axle to make it narrower, then I could try to thread it. And if that works, I could go that way. And if I can't get it to thread, then I can just slide it together and weld it and be done with it. So the only problem with cutting this up, if I ever want to put that original thing back together, I'd have to make a new one of these just like this. But if I could get something else, say start with the threaded rod and then cut this down to 12 millimeters here, I think that would be easier to do than getting a solid rod and cutting it down. So there's just more things there I can, and this isn't actually affecting anything else. I'm not destroying any existing stuff other than it's something I bought at the hardware store. So I wouldn't be.
I was driving to a store in Hempstead, Texas. It's between Houston and Austin. And you're reminding me of, I passed a metal shop, I don't know, Smith's Metal Shop, and it had no job too small. That'd be the place to take your blank rod and say, put this on the lathe for me.
Yeah, I don't know what those people charge. You know, they say, "Ah, no job's too small," but then again, uh, you may pay a lot for that. There are people around town. If I wanted to go to the trouble, I could say, "Hey, can you put this on your lathe?" And they got various things that would work. It's just that I like to come up with ways where I can do it myself. So when I have to do it the next time, I figured out ways to do it and have the stuff and the expertise to be able to do it.
Makes sense.
Now it'd be nice to have a complete, shop built right on the side of your house. I worked for this one guy, and he left his company, something about a divorce. He had to sell off his share of the company. So he just moved all of his stuff out to his farm. He's got this nice big pole building out there, and he built a really nice workshop there. That he had like a Bridgeport mill. He had drill presses, and he's got a 20-ton press brake that was about 10 foot wide, and he had all this kind of stuff, and he had welders and stuff in there. But that's a situation where if you can just get up in the morning, walk across your driveway, go in there, there's all your stuff set up from the day before, and start working on that. I think that'd give you a great incentive to work on stuff. But I usually have to say go in my kitchen and clean off my workbench.
Yeah,
So it's just it's just a pain to get started, and I don't have all the proper tools that you could have.
I'm in a similar boat. I've got to clear out things and move things around, and
And I do have the option. We do have the maker space here in town. I used to be a member of that, and that was kind of nice because if I wanted to weld something, I just go in there, walk in the back room, put my stuff up on the table, and turn on the welder and do my welding. When I'm done, just clean off the table and take my stuff and go home. So that worked out really well. But I decided it was more expensive for what I was getting out of it. I think the time was like $55 a month or something. But if you're not doing anything, that's just another $55 that you're paying out for not doing anything. And now I could probably get a senior discount, and I don't know, that might be $30 a month. So it might actually be back to my advantage again to check that out. But the other problem there is they've got like big metal lathes, they got the Bridgeport mills. They say, oh, but you have to show us you can use this safely. And then so a lot of it they say, oh, you have to take a class before you can do it. And as long as it's a free class, I don't have a problem with that. But then the classes they offer, like for the welding classes, they've gotten up like $200 is what they want to take the welding class. And that's because they'll get a member that wants to put on a class, and then the makerspace will take like 25% of the money they get. So everybody's into, let's charge people as much as we can. So that's another thing that annoyed me about the whole process. So
yeah, getting that machine work done has been a big challenge for me too. So it's like come up to it and then just stop and then try to figure that out.
that's why I started out building everything with wood, plywood and pine boards and whatever. And that actually works fairly well. It's just that at some point I think I was pulled some stuff out of the scrap bin at work that was steel, and I made my first steel robot by welding stuff together. And that's pretty much what I've been doing ever since, except when I was doing the prototype for my mini tractor. I built the whole front end out of wood with that just to verify the size and the shape and the positioning of everything. And then I went back and built it, by I made a piece of steel that it wasn't a square. It was like a rectangular, so it was like 1 inch by 2 inches. I took that and then welded those go-kart steering things on the end of it. And so basically I did it in wood first, then I switched over and made a metal one, and it seemed to work out really well. So I'm at the point now, my steering for this new one, I need to somehow get it all set up so I could verify, the height of the steering servo and the length of the steering arms and all that kind of stuff. So I might prototype that in wood, just get some wood and glue pieces together, and then try to verify, where I'm off the servo. Uh, is it going to work or not? So
Cool. Coat hanger is a good option too, if you need to like check out lengths and angles and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But not necessarily for a structural piece. Anyway, you can turn off recording now, I think.
Okay.